one of the attorneys representing this courageous survivor, who's identified as a Jane Doe, J.A. Jane Doe, anonymously, in this civil lawsuit that we have filed in the federal district court late yesterday. And this suit names the Ivy Hotel. I'm also here with my colleagues, Molly Burke and Parker Estenson. I also have to my right, Allison Fay. Allison Fay is with the Zero Abuse Project, the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, and an advocate and a director there. And she will also have a few words to say. Next to her is Molly Nehan. Molly is a courageous survivor who is standing up today with and for this survivor. This suit names the Ivy Hotel. It's 41 pages that we took from, of evidence, that we took from the criminal trial and the prosecution of a serial predator, Anton Lazzaro. You all know who he is. He's not only just a predator now convicted and serving time, he is and was a major political operative and a very, very connected one and a very powerful, moneyed individual. And he's been convicted of 5 counts of sex trafficking and conspiracy. This case names him as the predator, but we have a separate case that we have filed against him in the federal district court. So this case is against the corporate owners of the Ivy Hotel. They're identified in the complaint. They're the corporate owners that owned and operated the Ivy Hotel in 2020 at the time that he owned the condominium there and that he sex trafficked multiple kids. These defendants no longer own the Ivy Hotel. But it is these defendants and the Ivy Hotel, its management, its ownership, and its staff that are being targeted today. Why? Because they knowingly permitted Anton Lazzaro, a serial predator and sex trafficker, to not only live at their hotel in his condominium, but to continuously traffic young teenage girls up into his condominium at all hours of the day, in plain sight. And I will detail for you some of the things that were seen and known by the staff, by thus the owners and the management, that were so visible, so apparent. And so why is it we invite you here today to share not just this lawsuit, but some details pertaining to it, because it's not just about Anton Lazzaro, now convicted sex trafficker. It's about the scope and the breadth of this problem. Not just in the Twin Cities, and not just at the Ivy Hotel, the scene of the crime, but across this state and across this nation. And it's time for all of us to start to see, to start to watch, and then do something about it. Something the Ivy Hotel staff failed miserably to do. And so, Anton Lazzaro now serving, how much time is he serving?
30 years.
Serving 30 years. Before I go into some of the things that we have unearthed, Molly, why don't you address the folks here as to what you think we want them to know about this case and this problem.
This is a industry-wide problem that is horrific. This case in particular is a horrific set of facts where Hotel Ivy enabled a predator that harmed teenage girls, multiple teenage girls, multiple times. I've been doing this work with Jeff for over a decade. I've seen a lot of horrific things. I worked on the children's theater cases where we unearthed horrific abuses that occurred in the 70s and the 80s. There were adults that knew things and looked the other way, that knew things and did not protect kids. When we look at this case here, this case rivals that because it is not 3 decades ago. It is 4 years ago. It is current. That people at Hotel Ivy, the staff knew what was happening to these girls. They were told by girls. They also saw the comings and the goings and all of the circumstances that's laid out in the complaint. They knew, and they did nothing to protect these girls. No staff member intervened. Any intervention would have stopped this, and it would have saved these girls from ongoing subjugation of criminal activity. That's why here, this rivals the scope of something that we saw decades ago because it's happening now. And the Hotel Ivy was in a position to save these girls, and it didn't do so.
So let me lay out the scene of the crime and the circumstances of these crimes committed by Lazzaro in plain sight. And obviously the scene of the crime is the Ivy Hotel. And these pictures taken from evidence in the criminal case depict the bedroom of his condominium on the 19th floor, and also some small portion of the cash seized by the federal government when they raided and arrested him. And why now the Ivy Hotel and its former owners and management and staff? In the complaint and from the trial, we took some of the evidence that was adduced at the criminal trial. And there they had staff testify as witnesses and the night staff at the desk. And there were, and in the criminal trial and through our investigation, red flags flying all over the place. All the time. He was bringing teenage girls in and out of his place continuously, night and day, more often night than days, but both. And it was the staff there, manning the front desk and managing the hotel, that knew that he was a very prosperous, a very powerful, a very politically connected resident paying a lot of money to the hotel for his condominium on the 19th floor that he owned at that time, which has since been seized. And when I say the red flags were flying, let me just talk a little bit about what the staff testified to, and having seen that there was a lot of girlfriends and they met his type. His type was white, skinny girls under the age of 19 and all dressed up like models with perfect bodies, and they would come to the desk to see Tony. And to get up to his condominium, to his residence, they would have to accompany these girls. The testimony is the girls were 16 or younger, or 16 to 17. And that they would be coming after hours and in the night, oftentimes after 1 a.m. And Anton Lazzaro, as powerful and as moneyed and as politically connected as we all know he was as a GOP operative here, he had a modus operandi, a pattern that was so evident and so clear. And that pattern was to have Gisela Medina, who was then just 18 years old, turning 19 years old, as his recruiter of young girls. She's serving 3 years for her role in this. But what he would do is use her to recruit these girls and offer cash to them, and ultimately in exchange for sex. Also supply alcohol, also supply drugs, and the girls would become intoxicated as they left his condominium, often in the middle of the night, where he would arrange for Ubers to take them and or transportation to have them leave, sometimes so intoxicated they would have to be helped because these girls were so intoxicated while in his control. There was a private elevator to the 19th floor that had to require the staff to accompany these girls there. The front desk would call Lazzaro when they would arrive so that he would give permission for them to come up. Oftentimes, the girls were so intoxicated, as I said, they were unable to walk out on their own free will, and then he'd arrange transportation. On one occasion, one of the girls reported to the staff. And it is of record that she was a victim, and she went to the desk to report that Lazzaro is sex trafficking her and other girls. That he is offering cash to her and other girls and other items to induce them in exchange for sex. Her words, her report to the hotel staff. And then she asked them that they needed the staff to remove her sister from Lazzaro's residence because she was still up there. And the staff's response to her plea to them to save her sister was, there's nothing we can do. So she called her dad. Her dad arrives, and she's waiting for her dad in the lobby. And at that time, the father goes back to the desk and implores the staff to retrieve his other daughter, who's still upstairs, being trafficked, being used, being exploited and abused. And when he asks them to save his daughter from the capture of Lazzaro, what is the Ivy staff's response? There's nothing we can do. Now, there is a statute in Minnesota that says that hotels are required to provide training on sex trafficking and discerning the signs and the signals, and ultimately requires them to not only be trained, but ultimately to do something about it. And so this case is brought against the Ivy Hotel for its recklessness, for its indifference, for its negligence, for its failure to protect these kids for so long, so many times. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Allison, to say a few words about this and the problem. Molly, you come over there too.
Hi, my name is Allison Fay. I work at Zero Abuse Project along with my colleague Molly. Child sex trafficking does happen in Minnesota. In this case, it's a very painful example of what happens when people use their power and influence to hurt teens and to hurt kids. Thankfully, this offender was caught, but sadly, there's still so much work to be done. In child abuse prevention, the onus to end child abuse should never, ever rest on the shoulders of kids and teens. It's not fair. It's not effective. We can equip kids and teens with good information about their bodies and about safety. We should never expect them to ask for help and save themselves. That's not how trafficking cases work. The people who are being victimized in these cases, kids and teens, are for so many reasons rarely approach other people for help. That's its own presentation as to why, but it's very uncommon for someone to ask for help. So that's why it's so important that adults know the warning signs and act when they see the warning signs. That's why we have policies that put adults in positions of power to do what's right on behalf of kids. So training is one important piece of the puzzle to prevent, but it doesn't help when those who are trained don't act on behalf of kids. So today we stand with survivors in the hope that the response will change.
And thank you, Allison. Molly Nean is also with the Zero Abuse Project as an outreach director. And please, Molly, why don't you introduce yourself and then tell us why you stand with us.
Yes, so as Jeff mentioned, my name is Molly Nean. I'm the Communications Outreach Specialist for Zero Abuse Project. And I myself am a survivor of child abuse. And for 3 years, when I tried to speak out, I was silenced, shut down, disciplined, and made to feel like I couldn't trust anyone. But one of the most significant moments of my life happened when just one adult finally believed me and helped give me a platform to raise my voice up and speak truth to my story. So now, as I work to provide support for our new expanding child abuse prevention project, I know the impact that prevention and education can make on those who need it the most. And I believe with all of my heart in promoting the role of every adult to speak out and stand up for our children's safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. And when you mention, come on over. When you mention speaking up, taking action, Anton Lazzaro was not ever on the radar of the police or law enforcement for at least a year or two as he trafficked these girls. And it wasn't until a father called me and said, Anton Lazzaro has been having a sexual relationship with my teenage daughter, and he now sent me an agreement where he wants me to sign it on behalf of my daughter, in which he pays $2,000. I said, send me that agreement. And I immediately looked at that and realized this guy had committed a serious felony. And thus, we reported Anton Lazzaro to law enforcement. That father, in that call to us, was the first time any action was taken to protect these kids. All of them courageously, just as Molly stood here today as a courageous survivor. Thank you, Molly, for standing up and speaking up and being here with us and giving voice to both your pain and your hope that we can do something about this grave problem that plagues this city, that plagues this state, that plagues this country. And with that, I will take questions.
Were it not for the testimony at trial from the survivors in the case, but also the staff at Hotel Ivy, would you still believe you'd have enough to be able to bring a lawsuit, or can you describe how integral that was to this process?
The question is without the criminal trial, would there be enough evidence for you, for us to have brought this suit? The answer is absolutely. We got involved in the reporting of this early on, got involved in the criminal prosecution of it, and throughout the trial, and watched the evidence unfold. We also did our own investigation. And I'm citing to testimony given under oath here, and recited to testimony in this complaint. But there is an abundance of evidence about how visible and how known this trafficker of so many kids was, and how they made a choice. The choice to protect their patron, their owner, and turn a blind eye. And how many kids we know testified at the trial were 5 in number. But how many more are still out there suffering in silence, or secrecy, or shame? And so there is now a deep body of evidence that establishes the legal responsibility of the Ivy Hotel, and we're not trying to take them down, we're trying to clean them up, and every hotel in the industry, because this serves as a painful, sorrowful example of what a commercial enterprise was supposed to do, both under the law and to protect their patrons, and it made a commercial choice not to. And it's sorrowful. The other thing about this that is so striking is the recency of it. So many of the cases that we've had the privilege to stand with survivors and represent happened oftentimes decades ago, but not so here. This is so recent, so pervasive, so long-standing, and so egregious when it comes to that particular enterprise protecting that particular predator. So, questions?
Jeff, can you talk about the precedent for a lawsuit like this going after the hotel and its management company for liability?
We've researched other enterprises have been sued across this country, and we've been involved in some. But what marks this is a particularly high-end enterprise. When you look at a lot of the trafficking cases that have been brought across this country against third-party enablers, such as the Ivy Hotel, it's often seedy motels or commercial enterprises that are operating in the dark of night. And this is one of the first major prominent situations where we've had the opportunity to spotlight, to target, to expose a very high-end hotel. And our hope is what? Our hope is they get the message. And every hotel like them, high-end and not, get the message. If you see, take action. Call the police. On the report of the victim, on the report of the father, or on the simple discernment of the traffic in and out night and day of teenage girls coming with this guy who is a very public figure on Fox News, GOP operative, who flashes money around. Look at that. Look at him on the plane there. And look at the cat. I mean, this guy was visible. This guy did this, in open sight, in plain sight, to all those who could see, and all those that chose not to act. So that answers the question why we're here today.
The owners, you say they no longer own, but they're the defendants in the lawsuit. Do they own any other hotels? I mean, can you tell us a little bit about that they no longer own it? How difficult will that be to pursue?
Well, the question is, the defendants in this case are Heartland Ivy Partners and its entities, the realty company and the investors and the Hotel Ivy and the Wisherman Partners. And we did research on who owned it and who is thus responsible and who failed in their obligations to these kids. And we understood who the current owners are, and we did research about who the current owners are, and we then excavated that it had been sold by this enterprise to the current owners. So the current owners of the Ivy Hotel are not being sued here, but the former owners and operators through their employees are now the ones being sued.
And so, do you know if there are any indications that they have other properties where they might be repeating this kind of negligence?
We do not know about other instances of these folks, but we know that they're a large holding company, and we haven't looked at other instances yet, but we're in hot pursuit.
And last but not least, did they give the training that they're supposed to be giving in this hotel?
The question is, did they give the training? They gave the training because the front desk manager who testified at the trial said, we were trained in trafficking. But what good is training if you are trained to see the signs and you don't act on them? What good is a road sign if you don't obey it or act upon it? And in this case, they were trained as required by statute, but it meant nothing because they didn't discern, they didn't act, and obviously the training was as deficient as the choices that the staff made in not taking action when it was very obvious what was going on here.
Do we know what that training looks like?
It's required by statute, and so we haven't gotten into the training that they actually did, and that's something we will be unearthing very quickly. We just filed this case yesterday in federal district court, and as a part of discovery, we still have work to do, and we'll be doing just that. What training do they provide? What other enterprises do they hold? What other problems have they had? And how big a problem is this in the industry? Because this is really about the industry, isn't it? Not just Anton Lazzaro.
Do we know if hotel staff were being paid off by Lazzaro, if there were any transactions?
The question is, do we know that hotel staff was being paid off by Lazzaro? We know this today. He has a lot of money, and he has a lot of money, and he lived very lavishly. And so the implications to us, and it's subject to further investigation, are that he paid the staff a lot of money to look the other way, all the time. And that would account, in part, for their indifference and their blindsidedness. But we don't have and haven't interviewed witnesses yet that have said, I got paid. But we will. And we'll be able to answer that question more definitively once we get into what we call discovery. One last question.
Can I ask you a question of Allison?
Yes.
Is that okay? So the state law that was passed in 2018 requires training of hotel operators and has some penalties for if they don't complete that training. But is this something that the legislature needs to relook at and potentially make hotel staff and operators like this mandated reporters, such as teachers or others that interact with children?
Personally, I love when mandated report folks are given that role. That's just a personal preference because we see in our cases how many folks come forward because of their mandate. But I would say that that would be something that folks would need to look into. But in general, we just need to do a better job of, mandate or not, doing the right thing for kids. We shouldn't. We've heard so many people say, well, if I was mandated, I would have said something. If I knew that I had to, I would. And when they knew that kids were being harmed, we see that in cases all the time when people call our hotline. And so I think that is a great question to ask, and something that will be, I'm sure, looked at by the folks at our agency who do policy. But I think the bigger piece here is just the average person doesn't need a mandate to do what's right for kids. The average person working at a hotel who's had training and knows the danger of sex trafficking shouldn't need that to speak up and do the right thing for kids. But that is something that we in our policy group will be looking at in the upcoming year. Yeah.
And to the question is, should there be mandatory reporting of situations like this in a commercial enterprise, such as a hotel, of signs that we're seeing and now we know visible here? And our belief is yes, of course. If you're going to require them to be trained, you've got to require them to do something about it. What good is training if it doesn't mandate some kind of action? And of course, this is a call to the legislature in Minnesota to do something more than what has been done. Because if they had been mandated and they had been trained to take some action, pick up the phone and call the police, how many kids would have been saved? and not hurt. So it's not only a great question, but I think it's a legal and moral imperative to require these enterprises to do more than what they're being required to do right now, which is simply training. What good is training if they don't do anything with it? Thank you all very much, and thank you to the courageous survivors and the Zero Abuse Project. We appreciate you.